Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of supernatural fantasy and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doctor Who, as well as the series premiere of Charmed. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Doctor Who, you can skip to what I had to say about the series premiere of Charmed. But the first thing I want to talk about is this week's episode of Doctor Who. A great episode. Obviously, we're picking up right where the premiere left off with our heroes kind of just stuck in space. And what I find so fascinating is just, I was like, how are you going to find your way out of this? They just happen to be luckily saved by the two pilots, Epso and Engstrom, who just happened to be coming by because they were all basically locking on essentially the same thing, a planet that was moving. So I don't remember if they ever really explained why the planet moved. I think maybe it was connected to all the stuff that was going on the planet, but obviously I'll dive into that later on. For one, I love what the story ended up being about. Like, these two pilots are racing, and it's kind of a pretty important race. It's called a rally. It's actually the last one held into 12 galaxies, interestingly enough. 4,000 people started, and only we're at the tail end of it with our two finalists. And essentially, they are basically going to get paid so much money that they can take their family, basically have security for their family and safety on a safe planet and live out the rest of their days. And it's kind of interesting too, because there's a lot of little details here and there just as the episode progressed, like the little thing of like Graham being like, oh man, there's sand getting in my eyes, and then like the doctor handing him sunglasses. She's like, oh yeah, just kind of some like I had. I was like, that's kind of nice. What did 12 do with the last pair of sunglasses he had? Didn't he eventually go, like I said, my memory is terrible. Didn't 12 eventually go back to using like a regular sonic screwdriver instead of just the sunglasses? I can't remember, but it's like little nods like that. It's just kind of like, oh, talking about the previous doctor in some shape or form. Also, her being like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that this is all your first time on an alien planet, so welcome. Also, don't touch anything. Also, the doctor talked about being a hologram. That has to be a reference to something in the show. Maybe it never happened in the show. My brain goes to that simulation that they were in was it? Yeah, last season. But I'm sure she's probably referencing something else. Probably. Maybe. Like I said, it might not be something even on, like, that we've ever saw. But I immediately think of, like, the simulation. But I was like, would that even count as you being a hologram? Well, wasn't there a hologram doctor involved in that whole simulation situation? I think so. So, like I said, I don't know. Either way, it is kind of a messed up thing because it's this huge competition that I don't know if people died or not. I mean, there are people who lost and stuff like that. I mean, they never really go into it too much about the other contestants. Just kind of like, the other people that were, in the race with them, it's like, oh, they failed, to go into warp. So it's kind of like, okay, so maybe they're just not dead. They're just stuck somewhere else. I don't know. But either way, I mean, it's kind of crazy all that you're going through. But for them, it's kind of all or nothing, especially in Engstrom's case, because it's like for her planet is about to be cleansed and her family's in hiding. Others are running. And the fact of the matter is, like, this could be an opportunity to kind of save her family. She had to leave her family behind so that she could save them. Even her family was encouraging her to do it. And it's kind of like her last hope. And the sad thing is, she currently doesn't know about what the state of her family is, and they were alive the last time she left, but during all of this, they might be dead, which is kind of even heartbreaking because it's like, oh man, like, you could come back and they'll all be dead, and it was like all for nothing. But still, even for her, it's like, even after everything she's had to go through, it was still well worth it because of the situation she's currently in. And it turns out Epso's kind of a douchebag himself. You kind of see it at every point in time. He's kind of putting Engstrom down, being like, oh, like, how did you get here? You're so lucky. And we also hear that story from him where he basically talked about the story from his mom. I thought that was kind of pretty intense. And I love everyone's reaction of being like, your mom just like told, like, it's like, oh, I'll catch you. Oh, no, I won't. And that's your lesson. Never trust anyone in his life. It's like, wow, that sucks. And even Graham is like, man, yep, your mom sounds like she's awesome. But the doctor didn't agree with that because for her, it's like, your mom was wrong. The fact is, we're stronger together because he's all about, hey, I trust no one, only trust yourself. You can only rely on yourself. So I'm actually surprised none of them, like, I was so certain one of them was going to die. Turns out neither one of them did. So that kind of worked out. And I thought that was kind of beautifully done. Also turns out, because I was thinking that, I was like, I mean, I know they're going to different places and stuff like that, like during the season. Obviously, I saw bits and pieces of the trailers, but I was like, is the Doctor still not going to have the TARDIS? Because the TARDIS is nowhere in sight. Turns out the ghost monument that they're supposed to be, going towards, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually that's actually the TARDIS. And she's so excited. She's like, oh my God, it's found it. It's awesome. But that was also the interesting thing about it. Like, she ends up talking about the fact is she was in the right space when she teleported to get to the TARDIS. She was in the right space. It's just the planet had moved along with her TARDIS, and her TARDIS is phasing in and out of time and space. There was also something else that came up in this episode I thought was kind of interesting. There's something I kind of brought up last episode was the whole like Graham and Ryan thing and what that dynamic would mean. Obviously, you have Graham being like, oh, so is Graham now? It's still going to be Graham instead of Granddad? He's like, yep. So, I mean, it makes you wonder on why does he hold Graham in such animosity towards Graham? I guess because it's like, I mean, we don't really know too much about his grandfather's situation, but I'm guessing it's because he was close to his grandfather in particular. I guess it's also because it's like, it's probably for such a long time, it was him and Grace, and it's like he doesn't need someone new just making their way into the family. So it's kind of like you're an outsider. Like, even though you were married to her for 3 years, you didn't know her. But it's like, it hasn't gotten to that point for him saying stuff like that. But it's just kind of, because even Graham brings it up, it's like, we haven't even talked about what happened to Grace. And it's like, yeah, that literally just happened. And it's like, you're still dealing with it. And, but it seems like, I love Graham being like, I'll be there, I'll have your back, son. And then Ryan's like, I don't need your help. I'm not a kid. And he's like, I was hoping you say you'd have my back. But then Ryan's kind of like, you talk about this stuff too much. And then he tells Ryan, you talk about it too little. So it's kind of, I guess, like, Graham's the type of person who wears his heart on his sleeve type of thing. So I don't know. Maybe it's just because of the way his family dynamic and everything like that. I mean, it just might be Ryan himself. He's just not big into sharing his feelings and stuff like that. So that probably causes even more of a rift between him and Graham because they are such polar opposites in that regard. So I don't know. We'll probably definitely be seeing more of that aspect going forward. I also love when it came to those robots, like the Doctor being like, nope, don't like guns, so we need to be smarter. And then you have Ryan be like, no, I got this. I played Call of Duty. It trained me for this. He takes on a robot. So it's like, oh, that's okay. So he did it. I mean, it almost seemed like they were literally standing still. And he's like, yeah, who else wants some? They get back up. He's like, reload. And he's running away. He's like, ah. And he gets back in. And you're like, okay, so you done. So it made the situation worse. He's like, yeah, maybe a little bit. She's like, so, this is why I don't like guns. And she ended up solving the problem by using kind of like electromagnetic pulse to knock them all out. And she's like, see there? Brains are better than guns. It's like, but to be fair, Doc, the Doctor's super smart. So it's kind of like, your smart isn't comparable to other people's smart. But at the same time, it's like, I get it. I actually forgot to point that out in a more like a video. I did a nerd mode on Doctor Who recently. I was like, that's a key point I never brought up. The fact that the Doctor is like very like, well, I always said just armed with the trusty sonic screwdriver, but never the fact is that the Doctor isn't all about using weapons, going about things in a different manner. Like I said, that kind of feeds into what I was thinking about the whole Carl situation when he kicked that dude or pushed that dude off because the Doctor doesn't like killing. So it's kind of like, no, you shouldn't have done what you did, So I think that kind of, plays into that more. It's just kind of interesting when you think about it. Like I said, I kind of went into that more in the previous episode, but nevertheless. I kept wondering, too, what that whole cloth situation was going to turn out to be about, because I'm like, what is that all about? And it's like, oh, those are living weapons. Like, basically, because the Doctor kept bringing up the entire episode. Episode kept being like, oh, who cares? But it's like the whole aspect of, like, there's supposed to have been people here. There's civilization. Obviously, look at the way the tunnels are structured. So it's like there was stuff. People were alive here, but it's like when you look at everything, it's like there's no living organisms here. There's only them and the microbes in the water, the flesh-eating things in the water, which is interesting because it was mentioned, but it never plays a part in an episode to a certain degree. But now in retrospect, it's like, okay, it makes perfect sense because it turns out the entire planet was basically main focus of probably the facility that's there was meant to be a weapons facility. Scientists were forced to make weapons, which included the cloths, the robot. Well, the robots could have because the robots were supposed to be guards, so they probably weren't made. They were probably just meant to keep the scientist in line and such, because even it's like, but why would you guard an empty place? And I was like, well, that's why. And that to me goes like, okay, so that's probably what the flesh-eating microbes in the water were for, because they were supposed to make like, poisons and weapons and stuff like that. Because this is actually all connected to the Listenzo, which is kind of interesting. I was wondering if that was going to come back into the storyline. Turns out it is. It turns out they're actually the ones that Angstrom is kind of like, yeah, they're the ones who've taken over my planet and everything. I'm like, so I'm assuming it's setting them up to be the main antagonist, because it isn't just Earth. That they did say that they were a conquering race, so it's kind of like, okay, so you see that it is not just Earth that ends up being their playground. That they do the whole, I don't understand the whole cleansing thing. Like, do they pick particular planets to cleanse, or are they just kind of like we'll cleanse everybody type of thing? Like, that means eventually they probably would have made their way to Earth at some point in time anyway, so. But this whole place was about making weapons for them. So anything made the whole point too was to kind of like, that's why the planet is bearing like it is, because it's from the weapons that they created. They're the ones that kind of left the planet in the state that it's in, no other living things. And then there's those like, I think there was a name for them in the credits. I forgot what it was, but those cloth things, which kind of seem like sentient. It's kind of interesting, and it's like, and kind of messed up what the doctor ended up explaining. Is like, they're meant to get the wounded. So it's basically like, if there's a fight or anything like that, someone's wounded. And the moment the sun goes down, when you be kind of tired and at least expecting it, and you're wounded, those come to basically finish you off. And it's like, oh, that's brutal. But it's like, that's what they're kind of meant for in warfare. And it's just kind of like, that sucks. Then there's also the interesting thing about, because those things can kind of tap into fear and stuff like that, and the doctor being like, I've had 12 lifetimes, like my 12 lifetimes of fear overshoot anything you've ever faced before. And it's also like them calling her the timeless child, and that they know so much more about her stuff that even she doesn't know. Like, I guess they can tap into fears, but it can also, I guess that also means tapping into people's minds, like, which is interesting, because I was like, oh, so this is going to be like a personal doctor story too mixed in with this season, because they referenced that. So that's probably going to be something that it's just like a little spark, but you can probably tell that's going to be like a storyline in itself this season, which is going to be interesting, like what that's all about. Referring to the doctor as the outcast, the abandoned, the unknown, which is interesting considering the doctor's connection to, Gallifrey and the Gallifreyans in general. It's kind of like, what does that mean exactly? Because it's like, how are you really an outcast? Well, I guess that could apply, but it seems like you were ostracized. It's like, the doctor kind of created that situation in a way that, to stop the time war and everything. So it's kind of like, I don't know, like, I guess there's even deeper meaning behind that. I think it's kind of fascinating. I also forgot to talk about it that I really like too, is the fact is that the pods they were in put these implants in them to make it so that basically, hey, you can universally understand any language. And then I love Graham being like, can people and things stop putting things inside of me? And it's like, yeah, if we had the TARDIS, we wouldn't need it. I was like, right. I was like, because the moment that came up, I was like, why hasn't that never come up before? I was like, right. I was like, I always forget that the TARDIS is like a universal translator. I was like, I keep forgetting that. I'm such an idiot. I would assume, like, obviously you skip to an end and everything, but like having the TARDIS now, I guess they'll remove those things. So that's kind of interesting. Because I thought it was kind of interesting when it was all said and done too, that the doctor kind of forced the rally situation to be like, hey, it's a dual win, which it's never been before. Because interesting, Ilian, the dude running this, is actually the dude who started it, who won it, and is making sure that this is the last one. I'm wondering why is that? Just because maybe it's like you're putting out too much money and it's not worth it? Because it turns out, like, because the doctor had scanned the hologram, and it's like, yeah, you're super far away. So it's kind of like, I'm wondering what that's about. But I love Epso being like, yo, if you don't give us what we want, the fact of the matter is, if I get off this planet, basically I will track you down and you won't like that. I love that, dude. I was like, ooh, yeah. So, but sadly, the group got left behind. But luckily, the TARDIS was there. The doctor was kind of giving up, but the others weren't. It's like, no, we haven't given up hope. So neither should you. And all honesty, I thought was kind of an interesting thing, is even the doctor even talked about it too. It's kind of like everyone in that situation handled it pretty nicely. Like Yaz, Ryan, and Graham. And the fact of the matter is, they didn't blame her. She's like, and thanks guys for not, kind of blaming me because I did kind of put you in a situation, but she promised to kind of get them home and everything. So, and then the TARDIS popping up, and the TARDIS has kind of changed a little bit on the outside. It's like, oh, you've done some stuff. And it's like, the doctor gets inside. It's like, yeah, like, oh, look, like, I really like it. And it's like, I like the aesthetic. It's like, it's got like this crystal aesthetic for a lot of the stuff. I meant to bring it up at the beginning. I told myself to do it, but I forgot. It's a new intro too. It looks nice. And like I said, I feel stupid, but I feel like this season seems more colorful in some regards, maybe just because it's been a little while since we've seen any Doctor Who. So I don't know. It's just something, it seems like the contrast or something to like, and the coloring of it just seems different from previous seasons, but definitely even that intro just kind of being like, kind of got like this, I don't know how to phrase it, just kind of like that look and aesthetic to its intro was kind of nice. I was like, ooh, that's very different from any previous Doctor Who, because it doesn't even have like the traditional blue. It's actually a little purple, but it's kind of like, almost like you're diving deeper into the cosmos in a sense, whereas before it's kind of like this blue, almost like time stream that you're going through, but it's like, it doesn't look like that. So I thought that was kind of fascinating, like an aesthetic change. I thought was kind of interesting. And welcoming everyone into the TARDIS and everything, and it's just kind of like, it's so good, Everyone being like, whoa, how'd you get all this into a police box? It's like, no, it's, dimensional engineering. You can't engineer dimensions. Maybe you can't. So it's like, hey, it's a spaceship and a time ship. So she's going to take them back home. And considering what Doctor Who usually ends up being, it's like, yeah, them getting home won't be the easiest thing. All right, come to daddy. Mommy, or whatever. I love that. So, like I said, it was a great episode, and I'm very interested by like a lot of the stuff that it set up in this, because it seems like it's already setting up like two major plot lines, like the Lostenzo, and then all the stuff with the Doctor, the timeless child, the outcast, abandoned, and all that. It's kind of like, okay, so that's some interesting stuff. I also forgot to talk about how badass it is that the Doctor like had everyone kind of like dig in a little and then just kind of throwing a cigar up, stepping and like getting it to roll. I thought that was pretty sick. Burned those suckers up. But nevertheless, I'm very interested to see what the next episode has in store for us. And now moving on to the series premiere of Charmed, which is weird to say considering like, this being a reboot and everything, but nevertheless, a fantastic series premiere. I really enjoy this. Like, obviously, this first I'm probably going to do it all season 2, but it's me making comparisons to the original show. Not just to be like, all nitpicky and stuff like that, but more so just because it's like interesting with a lot of things that they do in this. But it's just in general, the episode was great. I think they did a very fantastic job, like setting the tone of this. It was so good. It was like very, like the original show had very humor to it, but I was like, oh my god, like it was a lot more humorous than I thought it would be. Even like the demon was tried to kill that Cam dude, and all the girls are like, and because he's like, oh my god, are you wearing a costume? He's like, no, Cam, I'm not wearing a costume. And then tries to kill him, and the girls kind of screaming. He's like, what? Come on, we can all admit he was awful. I'm like, you're giving your villains humor, like funny lines? I was like, okay, that's so interesting. Because I don't even remember the villains being like humorous in the original show. Like they were very like serious. Maybe it's just this particular villain, but I just thought that was kind of a nice touch. Like in general, I feel like the show is like a combination of having fun, but it also has this kind of like horror element. I think I've compared it to kind of having it kind of feels like Supernatural to a little bit, same network and everything. Which to be fair, is still technically the same network the original show aired on and everything too, but nevertheless, just kind of breaking it down, comparisons and stuff like that. It never once crossed my mind to think about their name situation until I started watching it, because it's like, oh yeah, one sister's name is Mel, the other one's Maggie, and then it hit me. It's like, right, all the sisters from the original show had the whole P thing going on. Prue, Piper, Phoebe, Paige. And I was like, right. And it turns out the final sister is Macy, who is the same actress who played Vel from Into the Badlands, if you've ever watched Into the Badlands. So that was the first thing I know. I was like, but I feel like I recognize the actresses who play Mel and Maggie, but maybe that's just my imagination. But if you're unaware, I talked about this before, that I think it's kind of an interesting thing that they are just skipping to the half-sister storyline, which I think is kind of a fascinating thing. It's kind of another tangent all on its own, but it's just kind of like that storyline became a thing because of outside reasons. They had to write that into the story. I don't know, maybe they always planned to eventually do the whole Paige thing. I doubt they did. I think that was just kind of like things happened with Shannon Doherty that they were just kind of like, okay, so we're killing off Prue and bringing in their half-sister Paige. But it's like that storyline doesn't exist. It's just like, oh, Mel and Maggie are these two sisters, and then they meet Macy, their half-sister. And I thought that was kind of such a fascinating choice. I thought about that when the trailer originally dropped. Also, is it me, or maybe I'm just not remembering it right? Do know that I don't recall a lot of Charmed. I don't know if I brought this up too. I meant to bring it up, but it's like, talked about it a little bit. I am a fan of the original show. I watched a lot of it when I was in high school because it was syndicating very heavily, because that was like around the time the show was coming to an end. So that's how I got my experience through most of the show. I watched most of it. I still feel like there's probably episodes I haven't seen, but I've seen maybe 95% of the show. Do note that I feel like I don't remember a lot of the early seasons. Like everything kind of 2001 where Paige shows up. Like I remember everything subsequently after that, but prior to that, I don't remember the Prue stuff as early on, but nevertheless. But getting back to the point I was trying to make earlier, is it me or does it seem like the sisters are younger in this? Maybe that's just me, because I definitely know at the beginning Piper was already working, but it seems like that might be, because it seems like they're all kind of college age, aren't they? Because I don't remember that really being a thing, because I definitely know Piper was working because she owned a restaurant and everything, or at the very least she was working at one. But it seems like all of them are basically at a college, As students, I'm not 100% sure. Mel and Maggie, sure, but I'm not sure about Macy. Because if I remember correctly, doesn't Phoebe go to college later on in the show? Maybe she did even at the beginning of the series. I know Paige does. Doesn't she, or is that still confusing out with Phoebe? I don't remember. It's kind of, like I said, a lot of that I don't remember. So it's just kind of interesting because, like I said, maybe they're just roughly about the same age, but I feel like these Charmed ones are younger, but maybe that's just me. I love their introduction to their white lighter, Harry. Also that he was posing as the replacement professor for their mom. I thought that was kind of interesting. Oh yeah. Well, because didn't the same thing happen with Leo? Didn't Leo kind of bump into them normally before he introduced himself as their white lighter? Maybe he didn't. I don't know. But I also love that Harry just kind of literally tied them up to a chair and was like, okay, hey guys, so you're witches and stuff like that. That's quite the way, but I guess at the same time it makes sense because it's the last thing you want to just spring this on them. They think you're crazy. This way you kind of force them to sit and be like, hey, yeah, magic's real. It's them messing up his speech and everything. It's okay, you guys are jumping forward and stuff like that. I was also curious about that too, because the trailer I'd seen didn't bring it up, but the whole Harry situation, whether they would use the same term or not, and they do white lighter. I was like, oh my God. And what I also really like too, and I don't remember if the original show did this or not, was the whole fact is that their abilities are kind of tied to their personalities to a certain extent, because Mel is very of a control freak. Her having the ability to freeze time kind of fits her. Maggie kind of either being her, basically it was either because she's very in tune with people's feelings, or whether it's just her own insecurity that allows her to read people's minds. And then Macy kind of being the scientific one, trying to understand it. That's kind of mainly why she was able to kind of control her abilities immediately. So that was kind of a pretty nice thing. I also love the whole thing with Mel in the regard of learning how to use her power, because she realizes it's tied to her emotions, because she's been a very angry person, and when she kind of lets her anger go, that's when her powers kind of activate, and she's constantly using them on Nico, her ex, who turns out to be a cop, which interestingly enough, I completely forgotten about it until I started thinking about it, because initially the only cop I was like, oh yeah, isn't that the whole Paige, because I know Paige and Kyle's situation. So I was like, yeah, he was a cop and everything. And so I was like, is Nico going to be their Daryl in that regard, but also have the connection? I was like, oh man, a cop being intimately romantic with one of the sisters is interesting. And then I remembered, no, Prue and Andy. Once again, I don't remember the early days as much, but it's oh yeah, Andy and Prue were dating, and he was a cop. He was Daryl's partner. And then when Andy died, Daryl took over as kind of the confidant in that situation. So I'm curious to see when it ultimately kind of circles all around, will it ultimately end with him, we'll end up with Nico being her confidant when she helped them on cases and stuff like that. Makes you wonder, or will it be something that's completely, I'm curious how they'll handle that, whether there'll be that cop aspect of it, of them having an ally in that regard, because mortals aren't supposed to know and everything, so we'll see in that regard. But But I just love it that she's constantly just using her power and she's getting all giddy about it. She's, ah! Like I said, because I think it's kind of neat. And, I feel like they had the most interesting reactions to this whole situation. I also love Harry being like, yo, just call my name and I'll appear. And then he does the white lighter thing and just kind of warps, boop, and then he kind of warps back. It's like, in all honesty, I just wanted to show you that effect, which I think is just a meta joke considering it's such like, oh yeah, we just threw this in there to an excuse to show you off what the white lighter teleportation looks like in the show. He's like, yeah, but they honestly prefer us to kind of pretend like we're normal people. So, and he just like literally just walks out the house and everything like that. I also think it's kind of interesting too that the house aesthetic kind of is very similar structure wise and kind of feel, and to be fair, it's been a while since I saw the Halliwell house from the original, but for this in this series with the Vera household, seems very like similar in that regard. It's almost like they made some modifications in some aspects, but it seems very similar to the original house. So I think that's kind of like a nice little hold on, because I feel like they could have easily made it a completely different house, but sharing a lot of aesthetics with I thought was kind of a pretty neat thing. Like I said, I don't know what it is. I mean, because this is like a more recent show, so maybe the show has a bigger budget or something. Because like it just seems like I don't know how to phrase it. Just like, especially how a lot of the stuff gets handled, the special effects and stuff like that. So, we're comparing a show that started in '98 and ended in 2006 to a show that's being started in 2018. So it's like not fair. Like, technology has changed in like that 12 years since it ended, but like the 20 years it started, which is like, yeah, it's still kind of trippy to think like, man, that show was like 20 years old. If you're unfamiliar, it started in 1998, ended in 2006, which I mentioned before, but nevertheless. So I just think that's just kind of an interesting thing. I love that Mel got super pissed because she was like, oh yeah, like she got a little bummed because like, oh, I don't get to use my powers. It's like, really? It's like, that's what you're bummed about? Because they ended up dealing with the whole Brian situation and with him being possessed and everything. It makes you wonder, was he always possessed or not? Or was it just like a more recent thing upon like their powers awakening that it's like, oh yeah, because I'm guessing when they first, like, the unbinding was there. Well, the way Harry makes it sound like the unbinding was started by their mom, who, interesting enough, is played by Valerie Cruz, which she's been in quite a few things, but I feel like the last thing I remember seeing her in, I'm sure she's popped up in something more recently, was The Following. If you don't know, that's like this cult murder mystery TV show that had starred Kevin Bacon from a few years back. That show, I think that's one of the last things I remember seeing her in, but I know she subsequently has popped up in other stuff. Like, I'm definitely familiar. That's like the most recent thing that's coming to mind about her. But nevertheless, it sounds like Harry's like, oh yeah, we did the rest of the unbinding, because I was wondering if it was them coming together that led to it being like, oh, now like our powers started unlocking because of that. Getting attacked by a demon dog, which I wonder, was that just a normal dog being possessed? I'd assume just because of the whole like black eyes and the kind of green goo. And I love making me like, is this going to leave a scar? And then Harry just heals her. I also love when he's healing Cam later on, and he's just kind of like, he's sighing, and he's just like he's like, it's such a bother having to heal somebody. Just kind of whatever, fine. Does it so nonchalant. I was like, shit, Harry kind of seems like he might be an asshole to a certain extent, which I like. It's just because he's so different from Leo, that's the real kick in the teeth for me in that regard. So, but I think overall, like, it also did a very good job setting this all up from the beginning. Kind of like there were, like, obviously, like, you had the whole thing with like Mel feeling like, for her, it felt like Maggie was moving on too quickly. You're just kind of forgetting about mom. But, for Maggie, it's like you become so obsessed, you don't want to accept the fact is that mom, it was an accident, but you're thinking it's murder. Like, it made everyone kind of think she was crazy, but secretly they both like kind of felt fault in this because, Maggie felt like Mel blamed her because it's like, yeah, if I had answered the phone quicker, maybe we could have gotten here in time to do something about it. But Mel was like, no, I don't blame you, because she's like, in all honesty, I blame myself because I had a feeling, but I wanted to go out and I just didn't convince myself to stay. So, but, they ended up kind of, reconciling and just, realizing that there was no one's fault for them in this situation. It's also sad. I'm very interested to see ultimately what ends up being the reasoning behind this whole situation. Because there's a whole thing about like the picture of Macy when she was much younger, taking a picture with their mom, which is like for one, Macy's dad was like, "Oh yeah, you're which is that's another interesting thing too, because Macy's dad is dead. I mean, I guess that could still play a role in some regard. Well, no, because it hasn't really come up the whole like them potentially. That's also going to be interesting to the whole half sibling having a white lighter sibling isn't going to play a role at all in this. At least not that we know of, because Sam Paige's dad was still alive in the show, but like Macy's dad is gone, and he even lied and said like, "Oh, she died when you were 2." But it's like, did he know? Like, did he think that like Macy's mom was crazy, so he didn't want her to be around her? Did he think it'd be easier that way? Like, did she say something all those years ago to make it for him to stay away? Did he know the truth about her being a witch? Like, it begs the question of how much he knows. Because, like, why would she? Because it's like you have your 2 other daughters, so why won't you take Macy with you? Why not bring her in as well? Like, you even took the photo in front of the house, so like, why? There must have been something all those years ago that happened that made her think like, oh no, I can't protect Macy, but I can protect Mel and Maggie. That's the big question. I'm curious. I mean, I guess it's also about hiding an affair she had, but at the same time, it's kind of like, yeah, but you, like I said, you took it in front of the house, which that's a big thing too. We haven't heard about Mel or Maggie's dad, so we'll have to wait and see on that front too. I'm also curious, like how things are going to work out for Maggie and the whole like her trying to get into that sorority situation. It's like, especially because your sister threw baking soda in the head of the facility, threw it in her face, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. That probably isn't going to reflect too well upon you. I don't remember that was a thing too, like kind of talking about the sisters, like if they chose not to be the charmed ones. Because it seems like they kind of had a choice in this one. Maybe they did in the original series too. Like I said, I think I barely remember the first episode. Like I said, don't really remember much of the early seasons. I want to say that was like what, seasons 1 through 3 that I'm kind of like the most foggy on. 4 on, I'm a little more clear on, not a lot, but still. But the whole aspect of like by not accepting their destiny, everything in their lives that was brought about because of magical intervention will be undone. Which I'm sure maybe there was a lot that was done in their lives. Because even like Macy getting that job, like their mom probably did a little, like she made sure to make sure that Macy would be in town and be near them and everything. Like she set that all kind of in motion, so that would be undone. They wouldn't remember any of all this, including meeting their half sister and her meeting her half sister. So that was kind of interesting. I also love Macy's reasoning for it, because she's like, I want to get to know you guys, but I also want to try and figure out this magic thing scientifically so that I can win a Nobel Prize for it. Which is like, it's great to know where your priorities in this whole situations are, Macy. But at the same time, it's like, hey, she did put the whole like getting to know my sisters first thing. It's just kind of like, you had to add that little caveat, didn't you? Which is something I really think is very interesting too. The whole like making like Macy like super smart and like super scientific, and she wants to kind of, which is kind of, I think it's kind of interesting because she's going to add like a scientific aspect to like the whole magic thing, because she might be able to like, oh yeah, here's a scientific substitute for things, because like even the demon situation she's reading it to, it's like, oh, it's this and this mixed together. Oh, that's fascinating. That's interesting. I was like, oh, that's pretty dope. And in all honesty, I honestly thought that final spell was kind of pretty dope, because like her using her telekinesis to bring Mel and Maggie to her and then uniting their powers and just how aesthetically it looked. I was like, that's actually super badass. I don't remember anyone ever doing something like that. Like we're separated. I was like, that's super dope. Of course you would utilize your power like that. That's pretty badass. Like it's just in general, like I'm really digging the vibe of this show, even making it so that Cam will remember, just because it's like, yeah, let him remember. Like no one's going to like believe you anyway, because it's kind of a nod against the whole like, oh, because was it Tadius is the name of the species of demon that Thanes was. Basically, he feeds off draining the life of strong women. That's what happened with Angela Wu, and that turns into that whole like situation. I doubt their mom knew what he was. Like, they all look so human and everything like that. So, but I also love when he was defeated and it's like, why isn't his body disappearing? He's like, oh, some of them you gotta crack their neck or, do something with the eyes or just, eat the intestines. I was like, wait, are you serious? Are you literally going to have to like crack necks? And then the body explodes and he starts laughing. He's like, I'm just kidding. Some just take longer than others. I'm like, you are sick, Harry. You were a little sadistic. Like that's like I said, this show has a humor like that. I'm like, man, I thought that was kind of interesting. Like I said, my memory on this is kind of all a little blurred. So, but it feels like just like aesthetically, like the humor seems very different from like the original show had humor to it as well. But this kind of seems like it has like a little bit of like, I don't know, it seems a lot more playful and also having a little bit of a little smidge of a dark humor aspect to it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So sadly, Thanes isn't the one who ended up killing their mom. There was someone else entirely because the code, I guess he was closing in because of the whole code situation. Maybe it was someone else, but definitely like the whole bird aesthetic, that's someone else entirely, which this is all revolving around the source of all evil, which I completely forgot about. I was like, the moment it said that, I was like, right, I forgot the source. I forgot all about it. It was essentially like the main antagonist of the original series. That whole aspect came and went. Like they destroyed the source at one point, but then there's like later points where it's like, oh yeah, the source's power kind of goes to a different person or it got locked up. So there's that whole situation, which I'm curious aesthetically what the source of, what, if I remember correctly, wasn't the source someone in like a red hood? And the whole Sears situation, there was a lot to it, which I like completely let that slip my mind. I was like, right. So I'm curious because this is all about them saving the world. I didn't remember it being something so grandiose, like as it them putting it in such layman terms of like, oh yeah, like you're saving the world, which is like in grand scheme of things, well, it makes sense, but still. And then it's like, oh, the 3 signs of the apocalypse, a man ill-fit, getting power. I forgot what it was. They were literally making a Donald Trump joke, which I thought was kind of interesting. I wasn't expecting. I was like, what? I was like, what's that supposed to be? I thought it was referencing the professor at the school. It's like, no. I was like, oh yeah, your president's like that. I was like, oh, wait, what? Oh, okay. Going a little political here. Interesting. I'm not going to fault you for that. It's like, yeah, you made your statement. Cool. Also, the other one was like their mom's death, and the third one was kind of unknown. So it's just kind of interesting to me that ended up, what that ended up being like all the signs of the apocalypse. And then the final note in all of this is the fact that it's like, oh, they used a Ouija board and it says don't trust Harry, which, hey, maybe Harry's lying and pretending he's not a white lighter, or maybe white lighters kind of have their own agenda going on. Maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. I mean, to be fair, just because they think it's their mom responding to them doesn't mean that it is. Because we know that the white lighters basically are angels in this situation. So it's kind of like they have it in with like her mom's up there, but he probably doesn't want to let them know because that probably like it's already kind of a tough situation that they're going through. So probably adding on that right now, just they need to focus on saving the world and everything, and they have each other. So that's immediately where my brain goes. I also forgot to talk about it too. I really like the aspect of like when essentially the title came up, it was like it formed like glass formed a logo. I don't know if it's always going to look like that aesthetically, but I thought that was just kind of a nice way to get the logo. Obviously, like this is the first episode, so we're not going to see like what the opening theme song to it is, if it even has one. I actually kind of forget, like a lot of CW stuff doesn't really have openings. They do have like, they have title cards, but remember the original show had like a legit opening, so I don't know if those really come up, especially like, I don't know, like things will have openings in the regard of like a title card and maybe they'll have a theme song, but it won't be something like the original, because the original had a very like catchy theme song. So like I said, I know I talked a lot about comparing the two, obviously the original and now the reboot, which I'm not trying to compare them in like a negative light. It was just kind of like very interesting. I was like, oh man, that's so cool that they're doing this and they're doing that and this and that. So I probably will continue to do that going forward. But like legitimately, I was already very interested in this, but legitimately this pilot got me super excited to see the rest of the season. No joke. I really like this, like everything they've got set up so far. So I'm very interested to see it kind of go for. I'm very excited to see what the next episode has in store for us. Also, like find out like what the other demons look like and stuff like that, and whether what else they go through in their personal lives and stuff like that, living under the same household. I mean, obviously, a lot more about themselves going to be unraveled as the season come together, not just as the charmed ones, but just individual witches and just people in general. So. And also the aspect of like, there's certain storylines from the original that I like that I'm curious to see whether they'll do those storylines in this season or not. I mean, like, there's the whole Cole and Phoebe storyline. It's like, technically, I guess you could say they kind of hinted at that with a little bit because of the whole, like, Brian situation. I mean, he's not like a full-on demon. He was just possessed. But still, that might be the fullest extent that kind of goes in that direction. But either way, I'm very excited to see what the next episode has in store. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and good